Welcome back, everybody, to Time to Talk. I am one of your hosts, Faith.
I'm your other host, Grace.
And today, I believe we're going to be talking about what we're reading.
All things books.
All things books, all things literature, all things reading goals for the year, which I'm failing on mine.
We don't really need to talk about that because it just makes my heart depressed.
I know, you think with so much time at home over the past several months with quarantine and everything that I would actually have read more.
Okay, since we're talking about reading goals, though, what was your reading goal and how far behind are you?
So typically, my high goal, the one that I really want to achieve, is 100 books a year. But I figured I would set it lower anyway to be achievable. And originally it was, I think, 85 books for the year. And that's dropped progressively lower.
So you actually changed your goal?
I did, to not make myself feel so bad that I'm like 10 books behind schedule.
So what is your new goal and how far behind are you?
I think it's 80 books this year, and I'm 3 or 4 books behind schedule.
Okay. I don't think I've actually succeeded in reading 100 books for the past couple of years. I think I read something like 96 last year. My goal for this year is set at 90, and I haven't moved it. And 10 books behind at this point. So I'm just dealing with it, but I've motivated myself to pick up a few shorter novels, and I've read now 3 of them. So I'm slowly working my way through some shorter ones, and then I'll got some audiobooks that I need to listen to. I'm hoping that I'll still reach 90 this year. We'll see how it works.
See, my strategy has been to be able to read 100 books because I'll pick a YA fiction series that's I can just rapidly fly through reading them, and listening to audiobooks too when I was driving all the time really helped as well, especially because I would pick shorter audiobooks anyway, and if you're listening to those on double time, you get through those so much faster than you would sitting down and reading that same book, even if it's only 300 pages long. And that's how I was able to just go boom, 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 boom through books. Well, now when it's just me having to make myself read on my own time, and it will interrupt other things that I might want to be doing at the same time, even though I love reading, I can find many excuses to not read.
Yeah, well, and then at the end of the day, it's just, I love reading, and I still read pretty quickly. It's slower than
It's
reading.
much slower than listening to something.
Yeah.
And it takes longer when you're physically reading a book for you to get into the story. Like, you really have to love the book to really get through it quickly. Whereas an audiobook, because you're listening to it on a faster speed, even if you're not really enjoying the book a lot, you can tell yourself, it'll be done in 3 hours or something. And it's easier to motivate yourself to finish an audiobook than it is to finish a real book.
Yeah, I will fully admit, I used to be the person who would never skim a book, and I always had to finish a book. And now I'm definitely a person who, if I really don't like the book and it's not worth my time finishing it, I don't need to finish it because there's a million other books I want to read that I know I would finish. So it's just a waste of time. And then there are books where most of the business books they're just so repetitive. So I was reading a book the other day. It wasn't a business book, actually. It was more of a theological book. But this book was so weird because it was supposed to be on the same topic, but like every chapter seemed to be a different essay almost, and it didn't really have a very good flow to it. So that was weird to begin with. 2, it was so repetitive. It was 15 chapters long. He said what he needed to say in the first 3 chapters, so the entire rest of the book, I literally just skimmed it.
You read the highlighted points?
I did. I was like, there were some things in bolds in these chapters, and there were a couple different stories, and that's what I read.
So I want to go back to the comment you made that you used to think that you had to finish every book, and then you kind of grew out of that idea. Do you know when that happened? Because that also seems to be a pretty common experience for readers, is to grow up thinking, and it might be having to do something with school and that you have to finish a book for a class, and so you think every book deserves that type of engagement. But when did you start growing out of that idea that you had to finish a book?
It was mostly due to Brian Hudson and just our conversations with him and the classes we had with him and comments he would make about reading that I think...
And for reference, Brian Hudson he's a kind of jack of all trades professor that we have at the school that we currently go to, but most of his classes that we've taken have focused on some type of literature or film or worldview.
Yes, and he's a fantastic instructor.
Yes.
But I listen to several book podcasts, and conversations like this sometimes come up in terms of how long you need to keep reading a book and stuff like that. So I've heard these things. It was just, there was only one book that I had ever stopped reading before that, and I kind of felt guilty for it, but I never went back and read it because I couldn't actually remember the book that I stopped reading. I think it was our conversations with him, and just, he gave you and I a book of, like, his top 100 favorites, and things just like that. And as I was going through lists of my own, I realized, if I ever do want to get through all of these books, and I'm still not ever going to get through them all. But if I want to try and get through almost all of them while I'm still alive, then you don't waste your time reading a book that you don't like. I mean, it's a big difference if it comes to, if you're reading something like Anna Karenina or Jane Eyre or one of the classics and you don't like it and you want to stop it. I think that's a different story because, yes, you could still stop it. I would say power through it. Or you could stop it. And it's not the time for you. But those books are classics for a reason, so you should come back to them at a different point in time. So there's a difference between why you stop a book. But if you're just reading, if you're reading a business principles book and it's so repetitive, skim it. Like, literally just read the chapter titles and headers if you want, because those are oftentimes all you need. And similarly with a lot of leadership books or things like that. And then if it's a novel that you're not enjoying, like, don't read it. You don't have to. Like, I'm not going to force myself to go and read science fiction if I really don't like the science fiction, right? I am never going to read Twilight just because I know, not going to like it.
What about the Hunger Games?
Oh, I'm working my way around to reading Harry Potter and the Hunger Games because, one, I know that I will already speed through YA fiction so much quicker, and two, I want to just read them.
She's feeling a pressure to be culturally relevant here.
No, I have heard that the stories are good. I know that Suzanne Collins' writing style is not the best, so that will be frustrating. But my plan is, since my big book goals for like the next year to 3-ish years are to read The Count of Monte Cristo, Anna Karenina, and something by Victor Hugo, which happens to be incredibly long. Those may be my balance out books.
Yeah, when you get tired of
Yes, when I get tired of reading all these Russian names, I will just go turn to the Hunger Games and
finish a book.
Exactly.
So, when you are reading something, what is the thought process that you go through when you realize that you have not been or are no longer interested in that book? How do you decide whether to put it down or keep reading it?
Again, I'm actually trying to think of a book that I stopped reading recently.
Because is your instinct just to skim it and still call it finished?
It really depends on what it is. The only books that I ever would actually stop reading would be something like a biography, some other kind of more narrative nonfiction work, fiction. I'm trying to think what else. Because something like a business book or a leadership book, or I guess more of a self-helpy book, or a research book, or even a book of essays or poetry are all different. I feel like with those ones, so excluding the poetry and essays, the other ones, it's a lot easier to decide if you aren't enjoying it. It's much easier to skim and still get the relevant content. And so yes, I would say you've read the book. Honestly, if you read an abridged version of those books, you've still probably read the book. Because the abridged version is what the book should have been. Most likely. For a lot of them. Yes.
Someone's not biased.
When you've read a lot of business books for classes, you just eventually start realizing how repetitive they are. And
There is. I hate the overuse of this verse, but there is nothing new under the sun. And people have unique voices in their writing, but they don't always have something unique to say. And so when it's the 50th time that you've read the same thing, I would agree with you that when you've read it once, you've read them all.
And when a book is titled Do Something, and then proceeds to tell you in all of the chapters, and it basically just ends with the moral, do something.
It starts feeling like an Aesop fable. Like,
yeah, you probably are good with
what's it gonna
skimming
say?
this book.
Do something.
Like, I don't know, maybe give it a chance the first time you read it, but if you ever for some reason want to go back and read it again, the title says it all. Just do something. Yes, I may be a little harsh towards those kinds of books. And even when it comes to poetries and essays, those ones are different. And I, like those books, I have read a few books straight through, but it's often more difficult, and I like giving those ones more time, especially if it's a compilation of different authors writing on essays on particular topics. I enjoy those works, and I want to
savor them over a period of time.
Yes, poetry and essays are things to savor. So those ones, I give myself a whole lot of grace, and I don't have to finish it in 2 weeks, right? It's more of a, if you're feeling in the mood and you just want like a delectable treat of, for me, like 99% dark chocolate. You pick up a book of essays or poetry and can read a few. It's really only when it comes to a book that if you were to skim it, it would be difficult to actually say you completely read the whole story. And I can't remember the last book I stopped like that.
I do. I have the huge, giant Truman biography by David McCullough on my bookshelf that I knew when I read those books anyway, you have to read at least a minimum of 5 pages a day. Otherwise, you get very lost and you can get very bored quickly because even though I love his style and I own almost all of his books, and he has a brilliant way of blending together the biographical information with the story of their lives. They're fantastic. It's just, they're the type of book that when you're not in the right headspace and you're not telling yourself the story in your head and creating these characters, it becomes like a history book. And you can get bored very quickly. And Truman is like, it rivals Anna Karenina. So I was not doing my due diligence and pushing myself to read a little bit every day. So even though I was enjoying it, I at one point put it down, and I think probably a week passed by, and I came back and I didn't use a bookmark, obviously, and so I couldn't figure out where it was. And then I just thought, you know what, I wouldn't remember anyway. I'd have to go back to the beginning of that chapter, and I just said, I'll put it to the side right now and read it.
I did remember the last book I stopped. It wasn't actually even a narrative book. In my whole list, I kind of lumped him in with the business stuff, but theology and philosophy books, the last book I stopped reading, because for a while, you and I was consistently reading at least one for school. So I was kind of used to it and being in that world and that writing style and just that heavier writing. Heavier is not always the best for all of them. It was just it's like it's equivalent to scientific syntax sometimes, just how they write. And so you kind of have to be in that headspace. So I think it's probably been a year or so since I had really sat down and read an actual work of theology or philosophy. So then I picked up a work probably a month or so ago, kind of towards the beginning of everything that happened with COVID. And I got through 3 or 4 chapters of it, and it was a really good book, minus the fact that the author was slightly repetitive. That was frustrating. But I think it had been a while since I had been in that headspace, and I just kind of immediately threw myself back into it, so it was kind of like drinking from a hot fire hose. So I stopped reading it, and then it's still sitting on my nightstand. It's been a little while since I picked it up, so I will probably go back and skim the first few chapters that I did read just to kind of reacquaint myself with where I was, and then pick it up again and go forward. It's not finished for good. It's just, it is a book I set aside.
It's a long intermission is what's happening.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think I have actually stopped reading a book recently. It has been more of I got into it and then it just wasn't a good time. I wasn't understanding. I wasn't fully invested in whatever that book was. And so it was just a long intermission. I had to set it aside and come back to it later.
And I do the thing where if I'm choosing a book to read, I'll look at the first couple chapters, whether I actually read them fully or I just skim them, and then make the determination whether or not I want to read them. I do that a lot. And sometimes there are books that I go back to them and do that again and again, and I'm never at the point where I really want to read the book. Mm-hmm. And so they kind of just sit there.
So we originally were going to have this podcast be about what we're reading, but we thought we'd do something else slightly more fun, since Faith's laughing and chuckling silently to herself about how many times I've said books are repetitive. repetitively. So we're going to transition the conversation a little bit. Before we do that, I am just going to say, what is one book you recently finished reading or that you're currently reading that you would recommend? Only one.
Oh, that I would recommend.
Yes.
That's the catch to it.
Yes.
Because I just finished The Catcher in the Rye, and I read it because it's one of my personal books. I bought it and it's sitting on my bookshelf, and I felt pressured to read it. And I also just owned it because it's one of those books that you grew up being told you should read, and so I also just read it. But I wouldn't recommend it necessarily.
So what is one book you've recently finished or are reading that you would recommend?
I'm trying to think through what I've actually read. Dang, this is not easy. Oh, so one that I have been reading, and is still sitting on my bookshelf for reference, is Atomic Habits by James Clear. I feel like that's kind of a cop-out answer at this point because I technically finished it several months ago, but I still go back and read portions of it.
Oh.
So that's definitely one that I've read recently that I would recommend.
Okay. I'm going to do slightly different end of the spectrum. I recently just finished... So there are times where I get in the mood for biographies, and I love biographies, and I also like history books. So I recently just finished a book called Evidence Not Seen by, I believe her name is Darlene Deibler Rose. And she was a missionary in the Papua New Guinea area right prior to World War II, and then spent 4 years of the war in Japanese camps. Lost her husband in it and remarried afterwards and stuff, and then ended up going back into that same place to be a missionary again. But it was her entire book was about her time in the camps primarily, and those experiences. So I recently just had a conversation with someone. I don't know, you could call me morbid or I don't know what, but I have a weird fascination with World War II specifically, but also World War I as well. And just...
It's so not morbid. Almost every homeschooler that I know, their favorite historical time period was World War II.
Okay. I like the wars. I like the American Revolution, the Civil War, the World War I, and World War II. I don't know. So I had pictures up. I can't even remember if I was recommended it or not, but it's very good. It was, I think, maybe a 15-hour long audiobook, so it's a little longer than some of the audiobooks I choose to pick up, but it was very good.
So now we'll transition to the topic that I thought of, which is biggest pet peeves as a reader that you have of an author. So what do writers do that just annoy you so stinking much?
Top one, repeat themselves.
True. Very true. So I actually found this article that I'm going to read them and we'll respond to them and whether or not we agree with them, or if we do, why. So the first one is inflicting endless pain on your main character to manufacture cheap dramatic weight.
Oh,
is that a pet peeve that you have?
Have I read a book where they do that, though?
So my first reaction is, when I was younger, I honestly wanted the protagonist to experience more pain in several books, because that reaction was typically to books where the other characters around them were getting hurt, and I'm just like, why can't the protagonist experience some level of pain? Because I thought they would be cooler, if they had a scar from something. That was how my brain worked.
Yeah, I don't think I ever...
Oh, I have one.
Okay.
Now I'm going to try to remember what the book is called. What is the book where the boy has run away and he's with his uncle, but he gets sick every other chapter?
Kidnapped.
That book. You and Paige loved that book. Liked it at the time.
I was going to say, loved is incredibly generous.
You liked that book, okay? My reaction at that time was, this boy needs a better immune system. Like, someone get him a doctor, someone do something. Because literally, the book was supposed to be about him, but most of the time, he was in bed, unconscious to anything going on around him because he's puking his guts out because he's got a fever all the time. I could not stand that. So I will fully agree with this person that inflicting endless pain on your main character just to get some sort of empathetic reaction from your audience is not a good idea.
It honestly backfires at times. Like, in that book, I will say I liked it, but it dragged because it was from the boy's perspective. So when you're sick all the time, it's a little difficult to
And you have nothing to say.
No, it's a little difficult to write a cohesive narrative that actually keeps you engaged when it's just like, and I passed out and I couldn't remember and was asleep for 3 days.
And I was in this feverish nightmare, and so I don't know what's going on around me. And you're just like, really?
That being said, it was a decent book compared to some other things I've read. But yes, it was definitely a needlessly sick
a needless
book.
pain.
It was needless. But I can't honestly think of anything else I really have read that the pain of any characters detracted from the story in such a way as to make it unenjoyable.
Yeah, and like Kidnapped, I think it's obvious when an author's doing that.
Yeah. I think to your point, there have been times where I wished a character would actually not necessarily experience pain, but I felt like they needed something more to push them along in their journey, if that makes sense. And often that did come through some type of suffering, not necessarily physical pain, but something needed to happen.
Right. And it's either you want the character to learn something, or you just want them to stop having this extreme streak of good luck where they don't get hurt at all, and it's just odd. Because you have the opposite ends of the spectrum. The character who gets sick or hurt all the time versus the character who everyone around him or her gets sick and hurt all the time. Yeah. And they're somehow unscratched from everything. Both of those can be very flat characters.
So, in other words, this pet peeve I can totally see. I haven't read a whole lot of books that it actually applies to.
Pet peeve number 2. The hero is, quote-unquote, damaged. So it's totally okay that they're an absolute jerk.
Oh my gosh, I hate that.
Is it true, though?
What have I read that would be the case?
I can definitely think of more movies that this applies to.
The Iliad.
Achilles.
Oh my gosh. Gilgamesh. Beowulf.
Song of Roland.
I was gonna say, honestly,
I don't know.
I mean, let's be honest though. All 4 of those guys have some type of damage, and if you met them in real life, would probably be major jerks, and you wouldn't like them at first. Like, I would maybe like Hector, but I don't think I would like Achilles.
I'm trying to think of a more recent book that I've read where this is the case. I mean, on one hand, The Catcher in the Rye is kind of like this, where the kid is just, he's really just a jerk. And there is no growth in the book. And it's also odd because it literally takes place over one night, the entire book. It is the longest night. And all you want to do, this kid listens to no one in his life. And yeah, his brother died when he was younger, and he's fixated on that. But really, you just want to grab him and hit his head against a wall or something for him because he has 0 sense, won't listen to anybody, won't get his life together, won't do anything smart, and just wants to run away from all of his problems and smoke and get drunk and everything. So you're just like, yeah, that would be a more recent example of.
See, I feel like most of the books I have read, if there is a jerk in the story, it's more of a supporting character, and the book is about mostly like how they're wrong. So I'm thinking, the first thing that comes to mind is something like To Kill a Mockingbird, where almost everyone except for Atticus Finch, Sam, and Jem, and even Sam and Jem to some certain extent, have this idea of Boo Bradley and who he's supposed to be, and of African Americans in general, right? And this book is, and there are several jerks in there. There are some jerks. But the book is primarily about how they're wrong. So in that sense, that doesn't quite fit the pet peeve, and it makes sense. Yeah. I think My Side of the Mountain, if you even remember that one.
Oh, I do. I liked that one.
It was decent, but also he was frustrating at times.
I was also just going to comment that a lot of modernist authors as well. And I think this writing pet peeve has something to do also with a more modernist worldview, and this idea that your faults are due to your environment and how you were raised. So basically, and so your actions and your behaviors and your your jerkness are excusable because of how the world treats you.
So this is, again, honestly though, all of the ones that we listed, like the Iliad and the Song of Roland, I still love those things. Maybe not so much the Song of Roland, but
blood, guts.
That one, I know. I was
it's like the scene from Utopia.
I know, right? That one I didn't really enjoy it just because it was very graphic. But even with those ones, and then the one I just thought of, the people being jerks didn't turn me off of the story. I'm thinking The Great Gatsby, where literally every single one of the characters, including the person narrating the story, are so just...
They're terrible human beings.
They are awful human beings in every sense of the word. But their damagedness, except for a few of them, there are a few that you just hate and you're supposed to hate and not like, their damagedness doesn't detract from the story. In fact, without it, there wouldn't be the story that there is.
Right. I think the whole point with all of these pet peeves is when they're overdone. That's when they become frustrating.
Yes.
If they're not done with a certain level of finesse and art, that is when they become irritating to someone who loves to read.
Exactly.
Number 3 is more of a statement, which is Frankenstein was the name of the doctor, not the monster.
Oh my gosh. I hate that. Yes, I agree. 100%. Please, people.
I saw something on Pinterest several weeks ago, but it was a Tumblr post where this first person wrote something, and they used Frankenstein correctly, and they were referring to the doctor, but the second person who responded to them, the response was just so automatic of, Frankenstein is the name of the doctor, not the monster. And so a third person responded and said, that moment in which the person actually used the name correctly, and yet the whole world assumes that they used it incorrectly because that is how grossly misused Frankenstein is.
We can just say 100% agree. People just need to read the book again and just maybe finally realize that it's Victor Frankenstein.
Which I understand,
and then the unnamed monster.
Yeah, it's just called Monster, which is exactly why I can understand.
It's Frankenstein's monster.
Yes, which is exactly why I can understand why people would take to referring to the monster as Frankenstein, because he's quote-unquote Frankenstein's family, in a way. But as a true literary connoisseur, no, I'm kidding.
Wow.
It's Frankenstein the doctor, not Frankenstein the monster.
All right, pet peeve number 4.
Metaphors are similes which go too far and are not comparable with whatever the author is comparing them with.
That's not true.
What do you mean it's not true?
Maybe this person's just reading bad books with bad metaphors. Because yes, they're right. Metaphors are extended similes. But almost every book I've read that actually has a metaphor as a basis is good.
Grace, I think their point is that these metaphors and similes go too far, and they at first weren't even comparable to what the author was trying to compare them to, which basically means you just have a bad author.
Yeah, and again, I don't honestly read a whole lot of bad authors, I guess.
Wow, you can just feel her nose turned up in the air.
No,
I think it's very true. I think there are plenty of authors who do this.
I just haven't read a lot of them.
But yeah, I would say that I haven't read.
And to clarify, yes, I have read bad authors. I'm not like almighty.
This is one of those pet peeves, though, where I think it's made fun of more. All I can think is more of in a movie. You know, you have that person who likes to think that they can make up metaphors or something, but they're really bad at it. I don't know where my brain was going. That was a complete rabbit trail that made no sense to anyone, not even me. All I'm saying is, I believe this pet peeve has some basis in plenty of authors. I just don't have personal experience that I remember with it.
Correct.
Number 5. When fiction set in the past uses contemporary slang. I have a hunch they didn't say crazy fast in the 1800s.
Oh my gosh.
This is so very true, though.
It's true. Oh, it's so true.
I cannot count the amount of times that I've read a historical fiction piece where they're not using the correct phraseology.
Connecticut King Arthur's Court.
Okay.
All the knights come in riding bicycles.
Okay, Mark Twain, that was just a lunatic piece of work anyway.
You actually liked that, though,
I
of the ones you read.
I did, minus the amount of scenes in which someone's unclothed.
Yeah.
For absolutely no reason. Regardless of that, I found it a much more interesting book than Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn.
So I don't really have a whole lot to say about this because I can't remember the last historical fiction book I would have read that they went back in time and used slang. I feel like most of the ones I've read they've been fairly true to that time period. Honestly, it was mostly like the Adventures in Odyssey stories that we listened to that anything like that would have happened to. Wow, that was just... But I am going to say, do you prefer someone to go back in time, or do you like the stories where someone from the past gets stuck in the future?
Okay, now you're going to have to give me examples of what stories you're referring to.
I feel like most of these are movies. So, I don't know. But, like, the first thing that popped into my head was the recent Night Before Christmas movie with Vanessa Hudgens. Wow. Do you... I
try that name again.
The recent Night Before Christmas movie with Vanessa Hudgens. I still think I said her.
I don't know.
I don't know apparently how to say her name.
I like how in our last one you were so judging me for pronouncing Benedict Cumberbatch incorrectly, and now you can't even say her last name.
Because I've never had to say it before.
Hudgens.
I don't know.
I think I just said that the same way
Yep.
both times. Anyway, I don't know what you're talking about.
I mean, literally the only books I'm thinking of that involve future events are things like science fiction.
Okay, well that's a valid book.
Yeah, but it's different because they didn't actually travel to the future.
What books do they travel to the past in, though?
Darian's Rise series, Madeline Langle's, specifically the Many Waters ones.
I haven't read all of Madeline Langle's, though.
Okay, well then just,
so I have Connecticut
Yankee
in King Arthur's Court, which she travels back to the past. Mm-hmm. And that book was decent. I mean, most of the books I know, they travel to a different world. I don't know if I have a preference.
Okay. Well, then we can just ignore this entire rabbit trail that I brought up because I thought, I don't know, I guess I can only think of movies where they travel to the future. I mean, where someone from the past travels to the future.
But the pet peeve still stands in that it's annoying when you're writing a historical fiction piece and you don't stay true to the original verbiage or even dress code and etiquette.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of if someone's traveling back to that time period, if you are writing a historical piece, make the historical setting accurate to what it actually was.
That's what I just said.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's easier to sometimes think of movies like The New Little Women or the lots of shows that happened in the French court, like Versailles, where it's very easy to pinpoint the historical inaccuracies versus in a book. I think it's a little bit more difficult to
The one redeeming quality of a book, though, you don't have to listen to people attempt to do accents.
True, very true. I mean, you just sometimes can't pronounce their names, and so their name is gibberish in your head, but
at least you can just imagine they're doing a perfectly beautiful accent.
If you know what the accent sounds like.
Yes.
Pet peeve number 6. Preternaturally self-possessed teenage protagonist or narrators. So I think Catcher in the Rye actually falls under this pet peeve more.
Is there anything I have read that would fall into that category?
If you haven't read a book like this, 1, I don't know, have you ever read? 2, what are you reading? And 3, my goodness, you are just a blessed human being not to have read a book where the teenage protagonist is a very arrogant, self-possessed person. Or the narrator is a very self-possessed,
he's not a teenager. Person. But again, Nick, in The Great Gatsby, is literally like, I am so much better than all of you people.
He's a narrator. That was this person's point, is it's the teenage protagonist or it's the narrator who's self-possessed.
Okay, then that counts.
That qualifies.
I mean, to some extent, Tom Sawyer, even though he wasn't...
Or Huckleberry Finn.
He's the protagonist.
I think that's how they start out as, is very...
Tom Sawyer still ends up that way. Huckleberry Finn less so.
Yeah, Tom Sawyer, he owns the world in his head.
That's all we need to say about him.
Yeah, it's people like that who... I think the point is people who do not see the faults in themselves. And you and the reader very clearly see them. And sometimes that's the point of the book, is that you as the reader know more than the person who the story's about. But it can also be extremely frustrating when you're trying to give this person advice through the pages of a book and you know that it will never work out anyway and they'll just make the stupid mistake because they are a jerk.
I mean, we could also basically say, like, a lot of the people in Shakespeare's tragedies.
True. Hence why I sometimes don't care that people bring their downfall upon themselves.
Like Laertes.
Yeah. Well, it was Shakespeare. We knew we were all going to die anyway, so I won't have any feelings about the topic.
There are a lot of words that you could use to describe him.
Who? Laertes or Shakespeare?
Laertes.
Both, but...
Yes, but completely different words.
Maybe.
As a playwright, I would speak highly of Shakespeare. I
As
don't
a
know a
person,
whole,
yeah,
I don't know a whole lot
him.
About his personal life.
No.
or even his professional life. So I reserve any judgment upon his moral character.
Okay, fine then.
But yes.
You could use a lot of words to describe it.
You could say, actually, honestly, a lot of his characters in both his tragedies and his comedies are kind of prepossessing, arrogant, pompous fools.
I think that's the point of a tragedy, though. Especially if it's written in the vein of a Greek tragedy, is that the point is the downfall is due to a flaw in the character. And
Oedipus.
that flaw can
Oedipus
be
Rex. Yeah.
a blindness of pride and arrogance.
True.
Typically.
True. I mean, even to some extent, the Aeneid as well.
Yeah.
Like, Aeneas and Dido are like, yeah,
He doesn't see the life that might be because he's so focused on this calling that he has and this need to build his own nation.
Okay, there we go.
Pet peeve number 7 is esoteric references used only to make authors seem intelligent and the reader to feel unhip or just plain dumb.
I mean, I feel that in a lot of books just because I do feel dumb, not because I think the author meant me to feel dumb.
Yeah, most of the time I give the author the benefit of the doubt that they just were writing in a culture in which those words or references would have been known, and I don't know them.
And the books that I'm thinking of, it would have been like that. It was actually something like Lord of the Rings, where he made all of those up. And so when he's referencing things, it's not because he's meaning you to be dumb, because he knows you haven't read them. Because that's the point. It's this world that he's created. And these are things from the world, not our world.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I can think is The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, where almost every line he is referencing something from Western civilization literary history. At first glance, it can seem like he's trying to be a pompous fool himself and just show how much better he is. But he's actually, the entire point of The Wasteland is to...
Did you just say The Raceland?
Well, I said The Wasteland, but I think it came out a little weird. The entire point of The Wasteland is to both capture the fragmentation of modernism, but also provide hope in the lessons of the past. So all of these references and stuff, and the footnotes, the extensive footnotes he has, aren't to demean the reader, but actually to provide a path for them to go on their own journey of exploration and learning and gaining knowledge.
Yeah, poetry is definitely one of those genres in which it's built upon referencing other things that as the reader, you don't typically know. Typically might be the wrong word, but you have a higher chance of not knowing exactly what they're referencing, especially depending on who the poet is and how they're writing, because some of them can be very cryptic in how they're saying it. Yeah. The other person I thought of too is C.S. Lewis, because in a lot of his work, he does happen to reference things in such a way that he assumes you know what they are, and you don't always know what they are.
I was going to say, there's also a whole range of, you know, there's several books that you and I have both read where at the beginning of the chapter, they will have like a saying or something at the chapter head. And oftentimes I don't know who said them or where they came from, but I don't ever approach those thinking the author was purposefully being arrogant in doing that. I just, you know, if you look at something like the Canterbury Tales or Shakespeare's plays or someone like Lewis or Chesterton, I look at them and I'm just thinking, no, the things they're referencing are from their time or things they've read and just been influenced by. And so when they bring these things up and maybe expect you, their audience isn't a reader 100 years from now. Their audience is the people who actually would understand that reference right now, who they're writing to. And so to think from your perspective that their obscure reference, they purposefully chose an obscure reference to sound arrogant, is wrong, because at the time it wouldn't have been so obscure.
And I think for me, I don't mind this pet peeve as much because most of the time I want to be that person who can make these esoteric connections and references and fully understand them. And so, you know, they might make me feel dumb in the moment, but it's not I'm angry at you because you made me feel dumb. It's more of I want to understand and not be dumb.
Honestly, I find the people who do that actually slightly amusing. So you read it recently, right? Did you finish Andrew Peterson's 4 books? Are you still...
Yes, I finished.
Okay.
These are the ones about
the librarian in them.
Yeah.
His name starts with an O.
Oscar.
There we go. I was going to say Oliver. Oscar. His entire... I don't know. His character... I don't know. It's almost everything he says is a quotation from something he's read. And most of them are completely made up by Andrew Peterson. But it's hilarious. Like, he's just the funniest character, and you have no idea what he's referencing. And I don't think any of the other protagonists honestly have any idea what he's referencing either. But it's just so funny.
Same, like, now that you mention it, Lord Peter Wimsey, and one of his favorite quotes, which I have, which is, I have a quotation for everything. It saves original thinking.
Yep.
That's very true, that those characters who make those references and say the quotes, they actually can be some of the most amusing characters, because everyone else around them in the story is just like, what did you just say? I don't understand. Speak normal, human. And yeah, that they provide a good laugh and comedic relief, and you appreciate their wit.
Yes.
Pet peeve number 8. People who have never written anything longer than a tweet but still criticize actual authors. I feel like this applies to so many people, and it's not really a pet peeve about authors. It's a pet peeve about readers, and I will fully admit that I 100% feel this pet peeve.
Yes.
There is a difference between reading something and not liking it, than verbally expressive in your dislike of the work. But so long as you read it, I think you're more justified than a person who literally... Okay, so let's take the Harry Potter for instance.
Just to clarify before I talk about this, we are talking about readers who don't critique a story because they didn't like it. They are actually critiquing the author's writing.
This says, the person says, who still criticize actual authors. So it could be taken as people who have never written anything critiquing someone else's writing. And I think that's a broad statement of just people who have never written and possibly also never read much, still thinking that they can criticize how someone else has written.
So for the sake of a conversation, do we want to take this more as, because I think both you and I, and most likely our listeners, will have had more experience with someone who hasn't read a whole lot, who is then critiquing an author's book. Because I would fall more into the camp of the person who critiques an author's actual writing style. I don't think I'm the most qualified person to do that, but I just notice things more about grammar and syntax, and I know it's more of I critique them because I kind of know what I like, and I just it's not a critique necessarily of I'm judging them. It's more just I realized I didn't like how they wrote because that's not how
I think that critique is completely valid, because I will admit there are authors I have read where I've read their first book and I've read their last book, and I will make the comment of, you can just see how their writing style has progressed. And it's more of a neutral statement that I appreciate their style and where they started out and where they ended. It's not a, wow, you were so bad, or you could have done so much better, or something like that.
And, like, I will say the first person who came to mind was Jean Stratton Porter, whom Paige loved, Mom liked. I think you enjoyed her books as well. My first 2 books I read of her were Girl of the Limberlost and Freckles.
Girl of the Limberlost was my least favorite of hers.
I read them all and I finished them. I did not like them because I didn't like her writing style. I will say when I finally got around to reading Laddie several years later, I loved it.
Laddie's good.
I loved that.
My 3 favorites of hers are The Harvester, The Beekeeper. Nope, I think it's called The Keeper of the Bees. That is the one book title that I can never remember which way it goes, if it's The Beekeeper or The Keeper of the Bees. But that one, and Michael Halloran.
See, I have not read those 3, so I need to read them. Why. But I will say that was, when I critique an author's writing style, it's simply because I recognize I don't enjoy it, and so it's harder for me to get invested in the story. It's very rare that I'm actually critiquing an author's writing style because it was just bad in general. And most of the time when I do that, it's one, because they either have way too flowery of language, or it's just impossible for anyone to read, or they just have bad grammar.
Oh, yes.
Like, my critiques are never a, like, literary professor's critique.
Like, I will make fun of someone like Faulkner because of the fact that his sentences are 2 pages long. So I will critique that style, but I still will read his books and enjoy them.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll critique someone like Cormac McCarthy, who writes in complete stream of consciousness for lots of his books with literally no punctuation. You're like, these still may be good books, and I've actually only read one of his, but they're hard for the average person to read because that's not how we read or write. And so it's a legitimate critique.
A lot of these pet peeves that we've read do have to do with the style of an author and whether they were forcing something.
Yes.
Or they weren't including something. Because that is the one thing with writing is if you can have a very good story, very good characters, but depending on how you write them, that's kind of where the make or break is.
Yes.
Because if you don't write it in the correct style, it doesn't work as well. Hence why editors are really important in the writing process. But I think, because you have authors who the story gets lost because they're trying to make a point in the stylistic technique. So possibly something like James Joyce and Ulysses, which I haven't personally read, but whenever I was in classes and everything, Ulysses was always brought up as an example of a writing style versus an actual story. And I think that's probably how James Joyce meant it to be too, is that it was more of a, hey, here's this new writing style versus here I'm giving you a good story. And so it can be very turn-off-ish for readers.
Yeah.
Because they don't understand the style, and so they get lost.
At the end of the day, it comes down to, has the author made a good decision of fitting the message and the story they want to get across with the actual nuts and bolts structure and syntax? Same goes for a good artist, right? Or anybody who's creating anything. Have they fit what their message is to the delivery method, right? And that goes for deciding whether you're podcasting about something or actually writing about it. So I tend to reserve my judgments in those areas because most of it just comes from the fact that I do recognize within myself I have bias, right? I know what I like, and that can turn me off of sometimes if I don't like something instantly. And so it's a matter of deferring your judgment on an author to give them time to kind of not necessarily prove themselves to you, but to let yourself enjoy the writing and what they're talking about. And then if, I would say if you're halfway through a book and you still are enjoying it, then maybe it just isn't the right time and you need to step back. So with that, do you want to kind of transition to that part B of that pet peeve,
go
which
ahead.
is the readers critiquing an author's actual story? Because I will say, one, I know way more people who have done something like this. They all tend to be not necessarily non-readers, but they are not literary readers. They don't generally read a whole lot.
And they probably haven't even read the books that they're critiquing.
Yes. And they fall in that category of, instead of allowing an author time to prove themselves actually worthy of classics that they bear the honorary title of being, they just immediately judge them on page 1, basically. And so it's frustrating. I think one of the things, I've heard it a lot, and I think you've probably heard it too, and I kind of say it under my breath a lot about these people, is the whole Chesterton's like, there's no such thing as an uninteresting topic. There's only such thing as an uninteresting person. Same thing applies to this. There's no such thing as an uninteresting book. It's an uninteresting person who just hasn't given the book enough time. Or it's not the right time for them to be reading that book.
Which I think there are a lot of exceptions to that statement.
There can be a lot of exceptions, yes.
But in principle, I do agree that people have a tendency to judge things that they don't understand.
Yeah.
What, are you thinking of a specific book or a specific author? Because I know earlier I started to mention Harry Potter as an example.
I have some examples, but go ahead with Harry Potter.
Harry Potter is an overused example, so if you have something else.
What, were you just going to say that you judge Harry Potter even though you haven't read it?
No, not me. I'm saying that was the whole thing with Harry Potter in the Christian realm, is that people were like, these are magical, satanic books that promote...
And yet they hadn't read them?
Yeah, and they didn't even understand them.
Yeah.
You said you had examples.
Yeah, I think it was most noticeable in 2 classes that we did. And the first one was the Lewis class that we had, the C.S. Lewis class. And the second one was the one we did on the 3 dystopias, and then the 3... What did we end up calling them?
I don't know.
The 3 other books.
There were 3 on... What's the world coming to?
And
then there were 3
like
on
the nature of man.
Yeah,
basically.
there were 3 on the nature of man.
Yeah. because those ones were very much more literary based ones, other than the orthodoxy class we did, which was on the one book, which even that one you could include because they were based around books.
So what are the specific examples of criticism that you're thinking of? What was said?
The amount of times I heard someone say they hadn't gotten super far in the book, or they just weren't enjoying it because they didn't read a lot and they just had a hard time reading. Or
That's
didn't
not
like
a criticism
the story.
of the book, though.
No, but it was twofold. There was a lot of people saying that they didn't read, and so they were basically giving an excuse for why they hadn't actually read the book.
Oh, well, that's just their problem.
Or it was they weren't enjoying the story, and they basically didn't like the book, and yet they apparently hadn't really read a whole lot of it.
Okay, I will give grace to people who say those types of things, because you can't judge someone just because they don't like a book that you happen to like. Everyone will have their own personal preference, and for some people it means that those tastes are underdeveloped because of the fact that they don't read as much, and so you want them to push through to grow their appreciation for books, whether or not it means that they end up liking someone like Lewis. But you have to take more of that encouraging, hey, maybe you should try a little bit harder to at least finish the book, even if you're not liking it right now, and see if it gets better, and if you can at least start appreciating it, versus well, you just don't understand because you're not a reader anyway, because that just turns people off from reading.
Okay.
And I will fully admit that in the moment, in the heat of the moment, if someone's criticizing a book or an author that I really love, and it's simply because they have not read that person or that work as thoroughly as I have, or at all, I will be upset.
I guess it was just frustrating to me because they already their first statement of they don't read a lot already told me they weren't a well-rounded reader anyway, and so for them to then start to make the second judgment of they didn't like the book, and that's why they hadn't read X amount of chapters, that was the frustrating part. It was it was more frustrating that they were excusing themselves from reading the book because they were making up excuses about how they don't read. That was the frustrating part. And they were passing judgment on an author's work because of their own faults.
Yes, speaking out of ignorance as if you have the knowledge is frustrating.
Yes.
But we all obviously start somewhere, and we were once non-readers, and then we were beginning readers, and then we were aspiring to be well-read readers. So, again, you have to have that grace with people who just aren't at the same level as you, while also still pressuring them to not speak as if they do have the same knowledge and experience as someone who has read 5,000 books.
Yeah. Which pet peeve were we on?
We are now on pet peeve number 9. A book with no description of the main character, or the description comes after you picture them in your head. I don't have examples off the top of my head of this, but I know when it happens, I will get very frustrated.
I feel like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe did this. Like, I feel like you didn't actually get a description of the 4 children until they were being crowned king and queens.
Yeah, that seems like a very Lewis thing to do, is not give actual descriptions of his characters physically. And I'm blanking on titles of books, but I know this happens, and I know it frustrates me to no end. Because then you have this picture of what you want the character to look like, and sometimes the author will then sneak in by the way, they're actually short. And you've been thinking for 75% of the book that they are actually tall.
I did this. So we mentioned it last week, Wayne Thomas Batson. The Door Within one. I didn't realize until the second or maybe even third time that I reread through this series that the protagonist in the first book, who remains one of them for the entire trilogy, was short.
What's actually funny is I always forget in those books that he starts out slightly on the pudgy overweight side, and I can never picture him that way.
I never could. And honestly, it doesn't really bug me because unless a description is crucial to a character and their part in the story, I'm okay with allowing myself to have a slightly different interpretation of what a character looks like than an author.
Oh, yes. Which is why I also don't like when the books come out that, they have the movies that are on them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they come out with the new updated edition of the book that
Mm-hmm.
has the actors
Yes.
who portray the characters on the covers.
Yes.
And so you can't get away from what the movie has said that these characters look like, whether or not it's true to the original story.
Mm-hmm.
I like having my own picture of the characters. Yes, I like having some guidance, but I definitely like having some of my own creative license.
Yeah. I think that's honestly what a good author does, is they provide you with some basic features, and then, like I said, if there's something crucial to a character, they provide you with that. But at the end of the day, a good author realizes that a reader is going to have a slightly different character in mind in terms of what they look like than the author themselves. So it's the reader also gets to kind of participate in that creativity of creating that character.
And that's how it should be.
Yeah.
Last pet peeve is books with multiple point of views that are not distinctly marked in a book, whether by a break in the chapter or a break between chapters, as if, one chapter is written in this point of view, one chapter is written in this other one.
Have I read anything like that?
I would definitely say stream of conscious works fall more into this.
I feel like everything I've read, though, that does switch between characters' viewpoints, because that's primarily how it's used.
Again, this is very stylistic in that, let's say your character has some sort of mental disorder. So someone like Gollum in Lord of the Rings, where imagine if the books were written from his perspective, it would be entirely confusing.
That would be horrible.
It would be insane, but that would also be the stylistic choice. But it would also be hard because let's say that Tolkien wasn't the good writer that he is, and so he wrote from Gollum's perspective, but he's trying to write a character who has such a warped view of reality, and then he starts writing from someone else's perspective who has more clarity. That would be confusing. That would be so confusing. And I think that's what this person is saying in their pet peeve, is that when a writer who doesn't necessarily have the skill to write from many different points of view, one, doesn't do the chapter breaks, section breaks, or whatever to even clarify that their new point of view is coming, and two, just doesn't even have the points of view clarified. I was going to say,
because most of the books I have read that would have been like that, there was a section break or a chapter break. And, sometimes it was just switching what character they were focusing on, right? So there's maybe two protagonists, and they're separated, and so the narrator actually switches between this chapter's on this character, then you switch, or there's sections between them, right? Or if it was actually a change in viewpoints in terms of maybe it being a first-person author, there actually was a clear chapter break between, like, maybe a first-person and then a third-person narrator or something like that.
Agreed.
Most of the books I have read, it has been done well.
That's also because if a book is written poorly, I will typically put it down.
Okay, kind of as we're talking about this, do you like first-person narrator books? Or do you prefer
What's my preference in
third-person, and particularly third-person omniscient narrators?
So I actually thought about this because I've read all of Charlotte Bronte's novels, and it struck me when I was reading one of them that it was written in third person, and I realized Jane Eyre was written in first person, and I believe one of them was written in third person and the other one was written in first person that I have. And I realized, I don't know. Most of the authors I know, well, that's not true either, because C.S. Lewis has books where he writes in first person and books he writes in third person. It very much depends on the story.
Okay.
It depends on the story. When you have multiple main characters, it needs to be written in third person. Whether or not it switches, preferably you write from third person so that you can hop from character to character if their storylines separate and then come back together. Yeah. And that's why you would write from a more omniscient narrative perspective.
It has to do with what story you're trying to tell.
Correct.
Basically.
You have to be clear on what the story that you're telling is, what the plot is, and thus who needs to tell the story.
Yeah. Because Till We Have Faces, Huck Finn, To Kill a Mockingbird, other stories like that, they wouldn't have the same weight that they have, and such an engaging story if they were told from a third-person omniscient narrator.
Yes.
Because so much of those books have to do with those characters' particular development. And it's not enough to just see from an omniscient narrator's perspective what's going on in their head. You go on that journey with them.
What I don't like are books that have multiple main characters but are written from first person. And so you switch between this first person for instance, this girl who's the first person and then the guy who is talking in first person, that becomes confusing because then you're in two people's head at the same time, or multiple people's heads in the same time. And I can't think of a specific book title right now, but I know I've read books like that.
Just waiting for an actual example. Come on. No, I'm joking.
Okay, so that's all of the pet peeves that we have right now about a reader of an author, but I think we should do an episode on pet peeves that we have of readers.
Oh, gosh.
Because I know you had a couple thoughts while we were just talking now about things that readers do, like over-recommending a specific author or a specific series. So I definitely think that warrants having an episode further down the road.
And we could honestly even say that my critique as a reader of other people who aren't readers
who are readers, but
kind of falls into that category too. So yes, we definitely could probably come up with a list of 20, but we'll narrow it down to 10.
I thought I was supposed to be the judgmental one.
Oh, goodness.
Grace is over here like, yeah, I have this whole entire list of 100 things that other people do that annoy me.
Well, I'm kind of joking. Not really, though.
Kind of, which means you're not joking. You're
not
joking.
I'm not really joking, but
when something is near and dear to your heart, like art or reading.
Oh, yes. No, that's what I'm going to say. If there's more so with art, because I think it's often more misunderstood than even literature is, there are things that I want to bang people's heads against a wall and be like, why?
It's so cute how you're excusing your behavior.
I am excusing my
But I'm also slightly convicted because I realize I do that myself.
Yes.
In excusing my behavior and my judgment of other people because I quote unquote know better, or
I know.
I'm more invested in something.
I try not to do that a lot, but if we are going to be talking about pet peeves, I'll bring all the judgment.
Well, I'm looking forward to that episode, and you're going to be leading the discussion on that one, so it shall be fun.
Fantastic!
For now, we will end this episode, and we would really appreciate if you would subscribe to the podcast, leave us a rating and review.
Follow us on Instagram at Time to Talk Podcast. When this episode actually goes live, we'll be posting it, including links to books we've recommended, obviously, and even the ones we didn't necessarily recommend. We may link those in there, except for Catcher in the Rye. We'd love to hear kind of what you're reading, some of your pet peeves, both of readers as regards to authors, but also for our next episode, we'd love to hear some of the pet peeves you have about readers with other readers. That would be great content and a way for you all to engage in the content that we're actually creating. We'd love that. So again, Instagram at Time to Talk.
And until next time, cue the cool music.